The biggest mistakes in life are born from arrogance. For a man named Ethan Reed, that mistake was his wife, Amelia. He saw her as a simple, quiet chapter in his life that he needed to close in order to achieve greatness. During their divorce, he took everything, mistaking her silent dignity for weakness and her compliance for defeat. He had absolutely no idea that her silence was a shield, not for her, but for him. This is the incredible story of how one man's ruthless ambition caused him to discard the one person who held the keys to a $100 million empire he never knew existed. The silence in their apartment had become a living entity. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of contentment that had once settled over them on rainy Sunday afternoons. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of things unsaid, of emotions curdled into resentment. Lily Moore felt it in the space between her and her husband, Elijah Reed, as they sat at the polished oak dining table he'd been so proud of. It was, he declared, an investment piece, a symbol of the life he was meticulously building. For Lily, it was just the table where their marriage was quietly dying. Elijah placed his fork down with a sharp click against the porcelain plate, a sound that made Lily flinch. "I can't do this anymore, Lily," he said, his voice void of the warmth she'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. It was now a tool, sharpened and precise, used to carve out his ambitions. Lily looked up from her barely touched meal. Her expression was calm, her deep blue eyes holding a stillness that had always unnerved him. He preferred big, loud emotions he could fight against, manipulate, and conquer. Her quiet was a fortress he couldn't breach. "Do what, Elijah?" she asked, her voice soft, yet carrying an unshakable strength. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at her, at the entire life they had shared. "This simplicity, this stagnation. I'm moving forward. I'm building a network, meeting people who matter. And you're content to just be." He said the word be as if it were a disease. For the past year, Elijah's world had revolved around his new position at a high-powered investment firm, Sterling and Croft. He spoke of partners and portfolios, of weekend retreats in the Hamptons, and the thread count of a client's suit. He had become a collector of influential people, and in his eyes, Lily was no longer a valuable asset. She worked part-time at a university library, helping students with historical archives. She loved the smell of old paper, the thrill of uncovering a forgotten letter, the quiet satisfaction of helping someone find a piece of the past. To Elijah, it was a pathetic, dusty hobby, not a career. "My life isn't stagnant," Lily replied, her hands resting in her lap. "It's peaceful. There's a difference." "Peace doesn't get you a corner office," he scoffed. "It doesn't get you a table at Per Se. It doesn't get you respect. Victoria understands that." The name hung in the air between them, acrid and heavy. Victoria Prescott, a junior VP in Elijah's firm, a woman who wore her ambition like a designer coat. She was all sharp angles and sharper smiles, her laughter always a little too loud at company parties. Lily had seen the way Elijah watched her, with a hungry admiration he hadn't shown Lily in years. "So this is about Victoria," Lily stated, not as a question, but as a confirmation of a truth she had known for months. "It's about my future," he corrected, though it was a weak defense. "Victoria is part of that future. She's aligned with my goals. She wants the same things I do." He finally looked at her then, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of guilt crossed his face before it was replaced by a steely resolve. "I'm moving out tonight. I've already got a place. My lawyer will be in touch with yours." Lily simply nodded. There were no tears, no screaming accusations, no desperate pleas for him to stay. Her lack of a dramatic reaction seemed to infuriate him more than any outburst would have. "Is that it?" he demanded, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. 5 years together, and you have nothing to say? Don't you care?" "I cared for 5 years, Elijah," she said, her voice still impossibly steady. "I cared when you were a junior analyst with worn-out shoes and big dreams. I cared when you were sick with the flu for a week, and I read financial reports to you so you wouldn't fall behind. I cared when your first big deal fell through, and you thought your career was over." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "My caring was never the issue. The issue is what you value, and you no longer value what I have to give. His face flushed with anger, a mask for the shame her words invoked. What you have to give? A quiet life in a two-bedroom apartment while I'm trying to conquer the world? I need a partner, Lily, not an anchor. He turned and walked out of the dining room. Lily remained seated, listening to the sounds of his departure. The opening and closing of drawers, the zip of a suitcase, the jangle of keys being snatched from the bowl by the door. He didn't pack much, she noted. Just the expensive suits, the designer watches, the symbols of the man he was becoming. He left behind the photo albums, the worn-out sweatshirt he used to love, the chipped coffee mug she'd bought him on their first anniversary. He was shedding his past, and she was part of it. The front door opened, then closed with a definitive click that echoed through the apartment. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was different. It was no longer heavy and suffocating. It was light. It was vast. It was the sound of freedom. Lily sat at the table for a long time, the cold food forgotten on her plate. She didn't mourn the man who had just left. That man was a stranger. She mourned the hopeful young analyst with the worn-out shoes she had married. Finally, she stood, walked over to the large window overlooking the city, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts past names like Mom and Dad, which she never called, to a single discreet entry, Mr. Abernathy. She typed a short, simple message. It's done. He's gone. A reply came back almost instantly. Understood. Are you all right, Miss Moore? Lily looked at her reflection in the dark glass, the city lights twinkling behind her like a sea of distant stars. A small, sad smile touched her lips. She typed back, I'm perfectly fine. It's almost time to come home. The law offices of Goldberg, Stern & Associates were the epitome of corporate austerity. Gray marble floors, chrome accents, and an unnerving quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. It was Elijah's Choice, a firm known for its aggressive, take-no-prisoners approach to divorce settlements. Lily sat opposite him at a long mahogany conference table, a vast, polished desert between them. Beside her was her own lawyer, a kind older man named Samuel Polk, who looked perpetually bewildered by the proceedings. Elijah, dressed in a custom-tailored Xenia suit, looked powerful and confident. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark-like woman named Jessica Blair, had a stack of files in front of her. Victoria wasn't present, but her influence was a palpable third party on their side of the table, whispering instructions in Elijah's ear. As you know, Jessica began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion, Mr. Reed is the primary earner in this marriage. His career trajectory is significant, and he has built a life that Miss Moore has, by all accounts, merely participated in rather than contributed to. Samuel Polk cleared his throat. My client has been a supportive partner for 5 years, managing their home and providing emotional stability, which allowed Mr. Reed to focus on his career. Jessica cut him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. Emotional stability is not a quantifiable asset, Mr. Polk. What we're here to discuss are tangible assets, the apartment, the vehicle, the investment accounts, all of which were funded by Mr. Reed's income. Lily remained silent, her hands folded calmly on the table. She listened as Elijah, through his lawyer, laid claim to everything. He wanted the apartment they had shared, claiming he needed it to maintain his professional image. He wanted the car. He wanted the majority of their joint savings, arguing it was his money she had access to. He was even contesting ownership of a small collection of paintings Lily had purchased over the years from local artists, dismissing them as decorative clutter. Samuel was aghast. This is unconscionable. Your client is leaving Miss Moore with virtually nothing. We can and will fight this in court. A judge will see this for the punitive and, frankly, greedy maneuver it is. Elijah finally spoke, addressing Lily directly for the first time. Don't do this, Lily. Don't drag this out and make it ugly. Just sign the papers. It's better for both of us to have a clean break. His tone was one of strained patience, as if he were reasoning with a stubborn child. He saw her silence as a prelude to a fight, a final, desperate attempt to cling to the life he was leaving behind. He was wrong. Lily looked at her lawyer, Mr. Polk, and gave him a small, reassuring nod. Then she turned her gaze to Elijah. "There's no need to go to court," she said, her voice clear and steady in the silent room. "I agree to your terms." The effect was instantaneous. Samuel Polk's jaw dropped. Jessica Blair's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up in surprise. Even Elijah looked momentarily stunned, his prepared arguments dying on his lips. "You? What?" he stammered. "I agree," Lily repeated. "You can have the apartment. You can have the car. You can have the savings." She paused, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "The paintings, however, are mine. They were purchased with my own money from the library. That is my only condition." Elijah and his lawyer exchanged a look of triumphant disbelief. The paintings were worth a few $1,000s at most. It was a meaningless concession. "Fine," Jessica snapped, quickly recovering. "The paintings are yours. We will have the agreement amended." Samuel Polk leaned toward Lily, whispering urgently, "Lily, you don't have to do this. This is financial suicide. We can get you proper spousal support, a fair division of assets. He is legally obligated." "I know," Lily whispered back, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "But I want this to be over. I want a clean break. This is my choice, Samuel. Please trust me." Her lawyer stared at her, searching her calm face for any sign of coercion or distress. He found none. He saw only a quiet, resolute determination that he couldn't argue with. With a heavy sigh, he nodded. "As my client wishes." The rest of the meeting was a blur of paperwork. As Lily signed document after document, signing away her home, her savings, her shared history, she felt Elijah's eyes on her. He wasn't looking at her with pity or remorse. He was looking at her with a smug satisfaction. The look of a man who had won a game she never even knew she was playing. He thought he was taking everything from her. He thought he was leaving her with nothing. In his mind, he was being generous by letting her keep her worthless art and walking away without a protracted legal battle. He was closing the chapter on his simple, unassuming starter wife and moving on to the real prize. He mistook her compliance for defeat. He mistook her silence for weakness. He had no idea that her silence was a shield, not for her, but for him. She knew with absolute certainty that if she had made a single phone call to Mr. Abernathy and told him what Elijah was doing, a team of lawyers far more terrifying than Jessica Blair would have descended and systematically dismantled Elijah's life, career, and future. They would have buried him in litigation so deep he'd never see the light of day. They would have done it not just for the money, but for the insult to the family she represented. Her silence was her final gift to him, an act of mercy he would never understand, and certainly didn't deserve. As she signed the last page, she slid the pen across the table. "It's done," she said softly. She stood up, shook her lawyer's hand, and walked towards the door without a backward glance. "Lily," Elijah called out, a strange note of finality in his voice. She stopped but didn't turn around. "Good luck," he said. It was meant to sound magnanimous, but it dripped with condescension. The kind of luck you wish upon someone you believe is destined to fail. Lily allowed herself a faint smile, one he couldn't see. "I don't need it," she said, and walked out, leaving him to his victory, alone in a cold gray room with the signed papers that sealed his fate. He thought he had won. In reality, he had just lost more than he could ever possibly imagine. The apartment Lily moved into was a third of the size of the one she'd shared with Elijah. It was a small one-bedroom in a pre-war building in a quiet, leafy neighborhood, far from the glass and steel towers where Elijah conducted his life. The movers, a discreet, professional team sent by Mr. Abernathy, had carefully placed her few boxes and the half-dozen paintings she'd fought for. To an outsider, it was a drastic step down. The floors were old hardwood, not polished concrete. The kitchen was cozy, not a chef's gallery of stainless steel. The view was of a brick wall and a sycamore tree, not a sprawling cityscape. For Lily, it was heaven. The first thing she did was unpack her paintings. She hung them with care, her expert eye finding the perfect placement on the clean white walls. Elijah had called them decorative clutter, but she knew what they were. One was an early work by a now famous abstract artist she'd bought for $200 at a student exhibition. It was now worth $60,000. Another was a landscape by a regional painter whose market was quietly exploding. They weren't just decorations. They were investments. chosen with a skill and foresight Elijah, for all his talk of portfolios, could never comprehend. For the first time in 5 years, Lily felt the suffocating weight of pretense lift from her shoulders. Her life with Elijah had been an exercise in self-editing. She had consciously downplayed her intelligence, hidden her knowledge of finance and art, and feigned ignorance on subjects ranging from geopolitics to classical music. She had learned 4 languages as a child, but with Elijah, she pretended to struggle with the menu at a French restaurant. It was all part of the role she had chosen to play, the simple, supportive wife, a role designed to test a man's character, a test Elijah had failed in the most spectacular fashion. She didn't return to the library. Her resignation had been quietly handled weeks ago. Instead, her days took on a new rhythm. She woke with the sun, spent her mornings at a small local cafe, reading everything from dense philosophical texts to thrilling spy novels. She visited museums not as a casual observer, but with the focused gaze of a curator, studying brushstrokes and provenance. She was not just looking at art, she was reacquainting herself with her birthright. One afternoon, a black town car, the kind that is expensive in its anonymity, pulled up outside her building. A distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and a beautifully tailored suit stepped out. This was Arthur Abernathy, the man listed in her phone as an uncle. In reality, he was the chief legal counsel for Sterling Enterprises and the executor of her grandfather's estate. More than that, he had been her confidant and protector for her entire life. "Lily," he said, his voice warm as he embraced her in her small living room. His eyes scanned the modest apartment, then settled on the paintings. He smiled. "Your eye is as sharp as ever. Conrad would be proud." Conrad Sterling, her grandfather, had been a titan of industry, a man whose name was whispered with reverence in the boardrooms Elijah Reed so desperately wanted to enter. He had built a global empire from nothing, but he was fiercely private and deeply suspicious of the corrosive effect of wealth on character. "He would have hated that man," Lily said, pouring 2 cups of tea. "He would have," Arthur agreed, accepting the cup. But the terms of the trust were clear. 5 years. Live a normal life. Marry for love, not for status. Find someone who values you for who you are, with no knowledge of the Sterling name. He wanted his successor to understand the world beyond the boardroom. Arthur sighed, a sad paternal sound. It was a noble experiment. I'm sorry it ended in heartbreak. Lily shook her head, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in a long time. Don't be. It wasn't heartbreak. It was a lesson. A very expensive, very necessary lesson. And besides, she added, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous light he hadn't seen in years, the experiment isn't over. It's just entering its next phase. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Oh. Grandfather wanted me to understand the value of a dollar earned through hard work. He wanted me to see how people behave when they think there's no power or money in the room, she explained. I learned that. Now I get to apply it. They spent the afternoon going over documents Arthur had brought in a worn leather briefcase. They weren't divorce papers. They were prospectuses, shareholder reports, and strategic plans for the Sterling Foundation, the philanthropic heart of the family empire. With Conrad's passing a year prior and Lily's 5-year term of anonymity drawing to its contractually obligated close, the board was waiting. The official announcement is scheduled for the annual Sterling Foundation Gala in 6 months, Arthur said, pointing to a date on a calendar. The board will vote to confirm you as the new chairwoman. It's a formality, of course. Conrad's will is ironclad. You will be given control of the Sterling Arts Endowment, a seed fund of $100 million to start. Lily's face was serious now. The transformation from the quiet librarian to the focused executive happening before Arthur's eyes. She scanned the financial summaries, her mind absorbing the complex figures with an ease that would have sent Elijah into a tailspin. The endowment's current portfolio is too conservative, she murmured, tapping a finger on a page. Too much in bonds, not enough in emerging markets. And its philanthropic focus is dated. We need to be investing in new media, in disruptive artists, in digital platforms. Arthur Abernathy leaned back, a look of immense pride on his face. The shy, quiet girl he had watched over was gone. In her place was the woman Conrad Sterling had always known she would become, his true successor. A woman of substance, forged not in the lap of luxury, but in the quiet dignity of a life lived on her own terms. A life Elijah Reed had foolishly thrown away. "So what's the first order of business, Madam Chairwoman?" Arthur asked, a playful title for the role she was about to assume. Lily looked up from the papers, her blue eyes sharp and clear. "First," she said, "we need to send out the invitations for the gala, and I want to make sure one, in particular, gets delivered by hand." She picked up a pen and wrote a name on a notepad. Arthur glanced down. Mr. and Mrs. Elijah Reed. "Oh, and Arthur," she added, a wicked glint in her eye. "Let's make sure his name is spelled correctly. He's always so particular about the details." 6 months felt like a lifetime to Elijah Reed. It was a lifetime spent ascending. He and Victoria had moved in together almost immediately, their combined ambition creating a vortex of social climbing and relentless networking. He closed 2 major deals at the firm, earning him a hefty bonus and the admiring glances of the senior partners. Victoria, with her pedigree and social connections, had opened doors he never knew existed. They were the new power couple, a fixture at every important charity event, gallery opening, and rooftop cocktail party. Their engagement party was to be the coronation of their success. It was held at a lavish rooftop bar in a boutique hotel, overlooking the glittering expanse of the city. The guest list was a carefully curated collection of the city's financial elite, old money, and the new hungry wolves of Wall Street. Elijah, holding a glass of champagne, felt a deep, profound sense of rightness. This was where he belonged. The bland, quiet life with Lily felt like a distant, embarrassing dream. He looked across the crowded terrace at Victoria, who was dazzling in a silver sequin dress, holding court with a banking air. She caught his eye and blew him a kiss. He felt like a king. "You've done well for yourself, Reed," a senior partner, a man named Robert Caldwell, said, clapping him on the back. "Victoria is a firecracker. And that deal with the Japanese tech firm? Brilliant." "Thank you, Robert. We're just getting started," Elijah said, his voice smooth with a confidence he'd once had to fake. His conversation was interrupted by a junior analyst, a young, nervous man named David, who approached him holding his phone. Mr. Reed, sorry to interrupt," David said, his eyes wide, "but you need to see this." Elijah took the phone, annoyed at the interruption. On the screen was a live feed from a major business news network. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Sterling Foundation announces new chairwoman at annual gala." Elijah scoffed. "The Sterling Gala. I know. Victoria's family has been trying to get an invitation for years. It's impossible unless you're practically royalty." He was about to hand the phone back when the camera focused on the stage. An elegant, older man, Arthur Abernathy, though Elijah didn't know his name, was at the podium. "It is my distinct honor," the man was saying, "to introduce the new chairwoman of the Sterling Foundation, the woman who will steward Conrad Sterling's legacy into the future. A woman of immense intelligence, grace, and a deep understanding of the world, gained through a unique and personal journey. Ladies and gentlemen, the granddaughter of Conrad Sterling himself, Miss Lily Sterling Moore." The name hit Elijah like a physical blow. Moore. It couldn't be. It was a common name, a coincidence. His mind refused to process it. But then she walked onto the stage. The entire rooftop party seemed to fade into a dull, distant roar. The Lily on the screen was not the Lily he knew. The mousy brown hair he'd always encouraged her to keep natural was now a rich, deep chestnut, styled in elegant waves. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut sapphire blue gown that shimmered under the stage lights, a dress that probably cost more than his car. She wasn't wearing much jewelry, just a delicate diamond necklace that glittered at her throat and a watch on her slender wrist that he vaguely recognized as a Patek Philippe, a woman's version of the one he dreamed of owning. She moved with a poise and confidence that was utterly foreign to him. The quiet, bookish woman who would blush when he introduced her to his colleagues was gone. In her place was a woman who commanded the attention of a room filled with billionaires and titans of industry, simply by existing. She stepped up to the podium, her calm, blue eyes sweeping across the audience. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice the same soft tone he remembered, but now it was amplified, carrying an authority he had never imagined. "My grandfather believed that true worth isn't inherited. It is earned through character, empathy, and an understanding of the lives of others. For the past 5 years, I have done my best to live by that principle, outside the shadow of my family's name." Elijah stopped hearing the words. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, washed over him. Sterling, Lily Sterling Moore, granddaughter of the Conrad Sterling, the legendary reclusive billionaire. The man whose firm, Sterling and Croft, he worked for, was just a minor, almost forgotten subsidiary of the global Sterling Enterprises empire. His world tilted on its axis. Every memory of the last 5 years replayed in his mind, but now they were cast in a horrifying new light. Her hobby of buying art from unknown painters, her fluency in Italian on their one trip to Florence, which she'd brushed off as a few classes in college, her disinterest in his corporate dramas, which he'd seen as apathy, but now understood was the boredom of a person who understood the game on a level he couldn't even fathom. His cruelty during the divorce, the insults about her lack of ambition, taking the apartment, the car, the money, leaving her with a few worthless paintings. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt the blood drain from his face. "Elijah, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Victoria was suddenly beside him, her voice sharp with irritation. She followed his horrified gaze to the phone screen. She saw Lily, and she read the headline. Victoria's perfectly made-up face went slack with disbelief. Her eyes darted from the screen to Elijah, and then back again. The calculation was visible in her expression. The instant processing of information, the dawning, catastrophic realization. "Is that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elijah could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. The look on Victoria's face was not one of sympathy for him. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fury, a rage born not of betrayal, but of a colossal, unforgivable miscalculation. "You idiot," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You complete and utter fool. You didn't divorce a librarian, you divorced a Sterling." The champagne glass slipped from Elijah's nerveless fingers and shattered on the stone floor, the sound lost in the sudden, deafening silence of his imploding world. The aftermath of the revelation was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. Elijah's phone, which had been buzzing all night with congratulatory messages about his engagement, fell silent. Then it began to light up for a different reason. Texts from colleagues at the firm, screenshots of the news article, a flood of question marks and exclamation points. The news of his connection to Lily Sterling Moore and his recent brutal divorce from her spread through the party like a contagion. The whispers started immediately. People who had been congratulating him minutes before now looked at him with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. He could feel their eyes on him, hear the fragments of conversation. "That's the guy. Divorced her 6 months ago. Took everything, I heard. What an idiot." The power and respect he had so carefully cultivated evaporated in an instant. He was no longer Elijah Reed, the brilliant rising star. He was the fool who threw away a princess. But the worst part was Victoria. The moment they were in the elevator heading down from the party, her fury erupted. "How could you not know?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the small enclosed space. 5 years, Elijah. You were married to her for 5 years, and you never once thought to ask about her family? About her background? "She told me they were estranged," he shot back, his voice cracking with desperation. "She said they were simple people from the Midwest. Her last name was Moore. How was I supposed to know she was a goddamn Sterling?" "You were supposed to do your due diligence." Victoria's face was contorted with a rage that made her ugly. "That's what you do in our world. You vet people. You look into their connections, their background. Her grandfather was Conrad Sterling. His picture is in the lobby of the building where you work. Did you ever think to notice the resemblance? The same eyes?" He hadn't. He had never looked at the bronze bust of the firm's founder with anything more than aspirational greed. He had never truly looked at Lily either. He had only ever seen her as a reflection of himself, a quiet, unassuming accessory that he had outgrown. Her family, the Sterlings. My father has been trying to get a meeting with their foundation for a decade. Victoria ran her hands through her hair, messing up the perfect coif. They could have revitalized our entire family business. With you as her husband, we would have been untouchable. And you threw it all away for what? For this apartment? For a car? She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You traded a kingdom for a trinket. The fight continued all the way back to their pristine, minimalist apartment, the apartment he had taken from Lily. Now it felt like a prison. Every object in it seemed to mock him. I'm ruined, he said, slumping onto the sofa, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow despair. You are ruined? Victoria scoffed, standing over him like a vulture. What about me? I attached myself to you. I put my reputation on the line for you. I introduced you to everyone. Now I'm engaged to the biggest laughingstock in the financial world. The man who had the sterling fortune in his grasp and let it go because he was too stupid to see it. That was when the truth of his relationship with Victoria became brutally clear. She had never loved him. She had seen him as a promising stock, an asset with potential for growth, an alliance. And now his stock had plummeted, and she was cutting her losses. Over the next few days, Elijah's life unraveled with terrifying speed. He went into the office on Monday to find that his access card no longer worked. He was met at the door by security and the head of HR, who informed him that his position had been terminated, effective immediately. There was no explanation given, but none was needed. Working for a subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises while being the man who had publicly humiliated the new chairwoman of its foundation was an untenable position. His calls to senior partners went unanswered. His emails bounced back. He was a pariah. The network he had spent years building, the people he had schmoozed and impressed, wanted nothing to do with him. He was toxic. Desperate, he started trying to contact Lily. He called her old number, which was disconnected. He sent emails to her old address, which went unanswered. He even wrote a long, rambling letter, full of apologies and explanations and desperate, pleading questions, and sent it to her old apartment, only to have it returned with a return to sender stamp. He was completely cut off. She had vanished from his world as completely as if she had never been in it, leaving only the crater of his destroyed life as proof of her existence. One evening, he came back to the apartment to find Victoria's closets empty. A single piece of paper was left on the kitchen island. It wasn't a letter. It was a bill from her lawyer for half the cost of the canceled wedding venue. On the table beside it, her diamond engagement ring sat like a shard of glass. He was utterly alone, in an apartment that was no longer his, surrounded by the ghosts of a future he had stolen from himself. He sank to the floor, the lawyer's bill crinkling in his hand, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he wept. They were not tears of remorse for how he had treated Lily. They were tears of pure, agonizing self-pity for all that he had lost. Weeks turned into a month, and Elijah's life continued its downward spiral. His severance package was meager, and his reputation was so thoroughly destroyed that no reputable firm would even grant him an interview. He was forced to sell the car to make rent. He started drinking heavily, the expensive scotch he once savored, now replaced by cheap whiskey that burned his throat. The king had become a court jester, and now he was just a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own ambition. His obsession with Lily grew with each passing day. It wasn't love or even remorse. It was a desperate, clawing need to understand, to confront her, to somehow undo the colossal mistake he had made. He followed the news about her voraciously. He read about her first major act as chairwoman, a $10 million grant to revitalize arts education in underprivileged schools. He saw pictures of her meeting with senators, artists, and philanthropists. She looked serene, powerful, and completely out of his reach. Then he saw it, an announcement for the grand reopening of the city's Modern Art Museum's new wing, sponsored entirely by the Sterling Arts Endowment. The article mentioned that the new chairwoman, Lily Sterling Moore, would be in attendance to give the inaugural speech. This was his chance. He spent the last of his savings on a new suit, not Xenia this time, but a passable off-the-rack imitation. He got a haircut and a shave, trying to recreate the facade of the man he used to be. On the night of the event, he managed to talk his way past the first layer of security, blending in with the throngs of wealthy patrons and journalists. The museum was breathtaking. The new wing was a marvel of glass and light, filled with stunning works of modern art. Champagne flowed, and the air buzzed with cultured conversation. It was the world he had always wanted, and now he was trespassing in it. He saw her across the main gallery. She was even more luminous in person than on screen. She was speaking with the mayor, a confident smile on her face, her gestures graceful and assured. She was surrounded by an aura of quiet power. Watching her, Elijah felt a bitter cocktail of emotions: awe, resentment, and a profound, aching sense of loss. He started to move towards her, a desperate plan forming in his mind. He didn't even know what he would say. Apologize? Beg? Yell? He just knew he had to reach her. As he got closer, a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit stepped silently into his path. The man was not large or imposing, but he moved with the unnerving efficiency of professional security. "Good evening, sir. May I help you?" The man's voice was polite, but his eyes were like chips of ice. I'm here to see Miss Moore," Elijah stammered, his confidence faltering. "I'm a friend." "I'm afraid Miss Moore is not receiving guests at the moment," the man said smoothly. "If you'd like to leave a message, I can see that she gets it." "No, you don't understand," Elijah insisted, trying to crane his neck to see around the man. I'm her ex-husband. I need to talk to her." The security guard's expression didn't change, but a flicker of recognition and distaste crossed his eyes. He had clearly been briefed. At that moment, as if sensing the disturbance, Lily turned. Her eyes met Elijah's across the crowded room. The world seemed to stop. The buzz of conversation faded away. For a long, silent moment, they just looked at each other. Elijah saw no shock on her face, no surprise. It was as if she had been expecting him. Her expression was not one he had ever seen before. It wasn't anger or hatred or even satisfaction at his downfall. It was a calm, dispassionate pity, the look one might give a stranger who has fallen, or a sad story read in a newspaper. It was the look of complete and utter indifference. She held his gaze for a second longer, then gave the security guard the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a clear, final dismissal. Then she turned back to the mayor, her smile returning as if nothing had happened, and continued her conversation. She had erased him from her world with a single, silent gesture. The security guard placed a firm, unyielding hand on Elijah's arm. "I believe it's time for you to leave, Mr. Reed." There was no point in fighting. The finality of her glance had been more powerful than any wall of security. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over him. He allowed himself to be escorted out, past the beautiful people and priceless art, through a side door that led into a cold, dark alley. He stood there for a long time, the sounds of the gala a faint, mocking echo from a world he no longer belonged to. He had come here seeking some kind of closure, some way to rewrite his own story, but there was no rewriting it. She had already written the last chapter, and in it, he was nothing more than a footnote. The museum gala was more than a success. It was a statement. In the days that followed, the city's cultural and financial circles buzzed not about the cost of the new wing, but about the content of Lily's speech. Her words were dissected in op-eds and discussed in boardrooms. She had managed in a single evening to shift the narrative from one of inherited wealth to one of earned purpose. The name Sterling, once synonymous with cold corporate power, was now imbued with a new, warmer light of social responsibility. Lily didn't just inhabit her new role, she became its architect, redesigning it from the ground up. She refused to be a distant figurehead who simply signed checks. Her days were a whirlwind of activity that would have exhausted the man Elijah had tried to become. She spent mornings in tense negotiations with the foundation's old guard investment managers, pushing them to divest from ethically questionable sectors and explore socially responsible startups. Her afternoons were often spent far from the gleaming towers of finance, in the dusty, paint-spattered studios of the very artists her grants were supporting. She once visited a young sculptor in a drafty warehouse on the industrial side of town. The artist, a fiercely talented woman named Maya, was near eviction before the sterling grant came through. She was wary of Lily at first, expecting a patronizing heiress. Instead, she found a woman who spoke her language, who understood the nuances of her work, and who saw the story she was trying to tell in welded steel. Lily didn't just look at the art. She discussed Maya's technique, her influences, and the rising cost of materials, eventually connecting her with a supplier who could cut her costs by 30%. She was not just a benefactor, she was a partner. This became her signature. She built a legacy not on grand, impersonal gestures, but on 1,000 small, meaningful connections. The programs she launched were revolutionary: a digital arts incubator for creators in impoverished communities, a second-act grant for older artists who had been overlooked, and a mentorship program that felt more like a family than a professional network. Several months after the gala, she was having dinner with Arthur Abernathy in her new home. It was a beautiful penthouse, but it wasn't ostentatious. It was a space designed for living, not for impressing. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves dominated one wall, and the art on the others was a vibrant, eclectic mix of established masters and the emerging artists she was now championing. It was a world away from the cold, curated apartment she had shared with Elijah, which had felt like a hotel lobby, and an even further cry from the small, Spartan apartment that had been her chrysalis. This place was a home, built by and for the woman she had finally allowed herself to become. Conrad always said you had a vision that could see past a price tag, Arthur said, swirling a vintage Bordeaux in his glass. He looked around the room, a deep sense of satisfaction on his face. He knew you would understand that his fortune was not a prize, but a tool, a responsibility. He would be so incredibly proud of you, my dear. Lily offered a soft, reflective smile, her gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. My life with Elijah, I used to see it as a failed experiment, a waste of 5 years. But I don't anymore, she confessed, her voice low. It was a difficult education, but a vital one. It taught me the anatomy of insecurity. It showed me how a man can be so blinded by the idea of success that he fails to recognize genuine value when it's sitting across the dinner table from him. He wanted a partner who was a mirror, reflecting his own ambition back at him. He couldn't handle a partner who was a window, showing him a world bigger than his own. Have you heard anything about his current situation? Arthur asked, his tone gentle, probing. Lily's expression became neutral, a mask of professional detachment sliding into place. I receive weekly reports from my security team, she said calmly. It's a standard protocol for estranged individuals, simply to ensure there's no potential for harassment or public scenes. The reports are bleak. She took a sip of water, composing her thoughts. He lost the apartment a few months ago. The severance from the firm wasn't enough to cover the rent for long. Victoria Prescott married a Swiss banking heir precisely 6 weeks after their engagement ended. A very pragmatic, if loveless, merger. Elijah now lives in a grim, low-rise apartment complex in the suburbs. He sold the car. He works freelance, mostly mind-numbing data entry and transcription services. Anonymous work for anonymous clients. He is, for all intents and purposes, invisible. There was no triumph in her voice, no hint of vindictive pleasure. There was only the quiet sadness of a final, objective assessment. A project that had failed. A man who had collapsed under the weight of his own shallow desires. Her silence during the divorce, her act of walking away with nothing, had been the ultimate test. It was a final, merciful gift, giving him the chance to be the bigger person, to be kind, to be fair. A chance he had spectacularly failed to take. The final, pathetic scene of Elijah Reed's downfall played out on a rainy Tuesday night. He sat hunched over the sticky, scarred wood of a dive bar on the outskirts of the city, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and desperation. The other patrons were ghosts like him, men and women nursing their failures in the dim, flickering light of a small television mounted in the corner. Elijah was a ghost himself. His off-the-rack suit from the gala was now his only suit, looking worn and out of place. His face was gaunt, the confident gleam in his eyes long since replaced by a dull, permanent exhaustion. He was staring into his glass of cheap whiskey when a familiar voice from the television cut through the bar's low murmur. He looked up, and there she was, Lily. The news channel was running a special segment on a new generation of philanthropists. The camera followed Lily as she walked through a vibrant, chaotic youth center in the city's most notorious neighborhood. The walls, once drab concrete, were now covered in spectacular murals painted by the children who attended, their supplies and the center's continued existence funded entirely by a sterling grant. Lily knelt, bringing herself to eye level with a small girl who was proudly pointing at a splash of brilliant yellow on the wall. The genuine warmth and kindness in Lily's expression was a physical blow to Elijah. He had seen that look before, directed at him, and had mistaken it for naivete, for weakness. The reporter's voiceover faded, and she addressed Lily directly. "Miss Moore, with the resources at your disposal, you could be anywhere in the world. Why pour so much of your energy and capital into a place like this?" Lily looked directly into the camera, and for a terrifying second, Elijah felt as if she were looking right at him, through the screen, across the miles into the dimmest corner of this pathetic bar. "Because a legacy isn't about the money you accumulate," she said, her voice imbued with that same unshakable calm he had so badly misinterpreted. "It's about the lives you enrich. My grandfather taught me that true wealth isn't found in a stock portfolio. It's found in building something of lasting value in the world. It's about creating opportunities where there were none, and empowering people to tell their own stories." Elijah stared, his drink forgotten. Each word was a nail in the coffin of the man he used to be. Value, legacy, worth. Words he had used constantly but had never understood. He had chased the price of everything and had never known the value of anything. He hadn't just lost a fortune. He hadn't just lost status and power. He had lost a woman of immeasurable worth. A woman who had offered him a chance at a life of genuine meaning, and he had thrown it away for a cheap, hollow imitation. He drained his glass, the whiskey burning a useless fire in his empty stomach. He threw a few crumpled bills on the bar and walked out into the cold, driving rain. He didn't have a car to shelter in or a beautiful home to return to. There was only the wet, black asphalt and the distorted reflection of his own face in a puddle. The image of a nameless, forgotten man, forever a footnote in the magnificent story she was now writing without him. And so Elijah Reed learned the hardest lesson of all, that a person's true value is never listed on a balance sheet. He chased status and threw away a treasure, mistaking quiet dignity for weakness. Lily's story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate often possess the greatest strength, and that true power isn't about shouting from the rooftops, but in knowing your own worth, even when no one else does. She proved that the best revenge isn't a loud, angry battle, but a quiet, well-lived life of purpose and success. What did you think of Lily's silent strength? Can you imagine the shock on Elijah's face? Let us know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible tale of karmic justice and hidden power, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a good story, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more dramas that will leave you speechless. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.